In 1997, on a quiet stretch of Utah highway, a single moment of drifting into sleep changed everything for the Olsen family. A simple drive home became the tipping point between life and death. What happened to Jeff Olsen that day did not just reshape his body or his future. It opened a door he never expected to cross, an experience beyond anything he understood about reality. Before that day, Jeff lived a life much like anyone else in a young, growing family. He was married to a warm, grounded woman named Tamara. She was thoughtful, deeply caring, and had a gentle way of steadying the people around her. Together they had 2 sons, 7-year-old Spencer, full of imagination and energy, and baby Griffin, still toddling through his earliest steps. Their home was filled with the simple things families treasure: bedtime stories, familiar routines, and plans for a future that felt certain. At that time, Jeff was focused on work, fatherhood, responsibility, and all the normal pressures of adulthood. Nothing in his life hinted that anything supernatural or otherworldly was waiting for him. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, safe. On March 31, 1997, the Olsens packed their car for a trip home to Bountiful, Utah. They had been visiting relatives in southern Utah, and like so many road trips, the day felt long but uneventful. The boys were tired. The highway stretched quiet and open. Moments like this blur into memory for most of us. A silent drive, miles rolling by, the hum of tires on the road. But sometime that afternoon, exhaustion caught up with Jeff. Without meaning to, without warning, he drifted into sleep behind the wheel. The car veered off the right side of the highway. The sudden movement jolted him awake, and in a split second of panic, he pulled the wheel too sharply. The vehicle rolled violently, flipping again and again. Metal twisted, glass shattered, bodies were thrown, and within seconds, the entire direction of Jeff's life was rewritten. When the car finally came to rest, the scene was devastating. Tamara didn't survive her injuries. Baby Griffin was thrown from the vehicle and killed instantly. Jeff and Spencer were left in critical condition. What had been an ordinary family drive was now a moment of tragedy, carved into time. But something happened to Jeff in the midst of that wreckage, something that did not belong to the physical world at all. As emergency crews worked and as his body lay broken, Jeff became aware that the pain around him had vanished. The chaos faded. The panic was suddenly gone. Everything went still, quiet, and profoundly peaceful. He felt himself enveloped in a soft radiance, a kind of living light that seemed to surround him completely. He felt whole, no injuries, no fear, no confusion, just an overwhelming sense of clarity and calm. It was as though pain itself didn't exist in this place. Then he sensed a presence beside him, familiar, intimate, unmistakable. When he turned, he saw Tamara. Not in the condition she had been in after the crash, but radiant, peaceful, more alive and vibrant than he had ever seen her on Earth. She felt real to him. Not like a dream, not like a memory. More real than any physical experience he had ever had. She was herself, but filled with a kind of light he had no words for. But something struck him immediately. She was crying. He didn't understand. How could she be here, alive, healthy, shining, yet filled with sorrow? He tried to ask her what was happening. Was the crash just a nightmare? Were they both dead? Were their boys safe? Tamara reached for him, holding him in a way that carried both love and pain. And she told him something he would never forget. "You can't stay here. You have to go back." He resisted. He wanted to stay. The peace of that place was unlike anything he had ever known. There was no fear, no weight, no grief, just a feeling of being home in the deepest possible sense. But her expression told him this wasn't his choice. In that moment, the image of their son Spencer flashed into his mind. their 7-year-old boy, injured, afraid, still alive in the physical world. Jeff felt pulled toward him as if the love for his child was anchoring him back to life. Tamara told him again, "You have to go back," and her voice carried both heartbreak and certainty. They both seemed to know that Jeff returning to Earth would mean facing incredible pain, but they also understood that Spencer needed his father. As the light began to pull away, Jeff felt a question rise inside him, not spoken aloud, but communicated in a way that went straight into his consciousness.
To what degree have you learned to love?
It wasn't a question about his status, his possessions, his accomplishments, or his failures. It wasn't about success, pride, or achievements. It was simple and piercing. How deeply had he loved? And then, slowly, the light faded. Back on Earth, paramedics rushed Jeff and Spencer to the hospital. The physical reality of the situation was catastrophic. Jeff's injuries were extensive, bones shattered, internal bleeding, massive trauma. He would eventually undergo around 18 surgeries, including the loss of his left leg and major abdominal reconstruction. But while the medical teams worked on Jeff's body, something else was happening that couldn't be measured on machines. In the emergency room, the attending physician, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, had an experience of his own. As he assessed Jeff's condition, he became aware of the presence of a woman. She was not visible to anyone else, but to him, she was undeniably present, conscious, watching over Jeff, radiating concern and love. The doctor later identified her as Tamara, an experience he kept private for years, unsure how to describe it. Only later, when Jeff shared what he saw in the light, did the timelines and details between their experiences align. Jeff eventually regained consciousness in the hospital. But waking up brought a different kind of agony, the emotional kind. He learned that Tamara had died. He learned that baby Griffin was gone. And he learned that he himself had barely survived. He woke to a world that no longer resembled the life he had known, a world where the woman he loved was gone, a world where he would leave the hospital missing a limb and carrying grief that felt almost too heavy to survive. The hospital became a place of both relentless pain and unexpected spiritual depth. Jeff underwent surgeries, faced infections, and endured the harsh reality of moving through life as an amputee. But in the quietest moments, between the medication, the sleepless nights, the physical therapy, there were flashes of the presence he had experienced beyond the veil. Sometimes a nurse would enter the room, and Jeff felt a sensation of warmth, as if light traveled with them. Sometimes he sensed a gentle presence standing nearby, reminding him that he was not alone. The memory of the light, of Tamara's touch, and of that unspoken question about love stayed with him, guiding him through the darkest hours. Months passed. Eventually, Jeff was transferred to the rehabilitation wing. By then, the surgeries had stabilized him, and he was learning how to navigate life with his new physical limitations. But emotionally, he was still broken. He wasn't just grieving his wife and child. He was grieving the version of himself that had died in the crash, the man who walked on 2 legs, who had a full family, who thought he understood how life would go. One night, exhausted, he fell into a deep sleep. And in that sleep, something familiar happened. He felt himself rising above his hospital bed. He felt weightless again, free of pain, surrounded by that same living light he had experienced at the scene of the accident. The presence of God, or whatever name one chooses for that divine reality, wrapped around him in unconditional, overwhelming love. In that presence, Jeff felt deeply known beyond words, known beyond identity. Every part of him, his strengths, failures, regrets, hopes, grief, and fears, was understood and embraced. There was no judgment, only love. The experience didn't bring Tamara back into physical form. It didn't erase the grief or make the pain vanish. But it changed the way Jeff held that grief. It gave him the strength to move forward. It gave him the sense that death was not the end and that the people he had lost were not gone forever. Eventually, Jeff was released from the hospital. He didn't leave triumphantly. He left in a wheelchair, missing a leg, weakened, scarred, and carrying emotional wounds far deeper than the physical ones. But someone was waiting for him. His son Spencer, a little boy who had lost his mother, his baby brother, and the life he once knew. The two of them began rebuilding life together, slowly, carefully, with grief always present, but love always present too. Jeff learned how to walk again using a prosthetic limb. He learned how to cook, clean, work, and parent as a single father. Spencer learned how to adapt to a new world without his mother and brother. The two of them leaned on each other, creating a bond that carried them through years of healing. As time passed, Jeff began sharing his experience, not dramatically, not to convince anyone, but because the truth of what he saw was too deep to keep inside. He wrote about the accident, about Tamara, about Griffin, and about the light that had embraced him when his heart stopped. He wrote about the question that still echoes in him. To what degree have you learned to love? Eventually, Jeff and his son co-authored a book together, a reflection on grief, healing, resilience, and the unseen connections that bind families even after death. Today, Jeff travels and speaks around the world, not as a preacher, not as a perfect man, but as someone who survived unthinkable loss, stepped momentarily into something sacred, and returned with a message. He tells people that love is stronger than death, that our connections don't break when a body dies, that the people we lose remain with us, just in a different way, and that the measure of a life is not found in achievements or failures, but in how well we learn to love. His story is heartbreaking, beautiful, and profoundly human. A reminder that even in the darkest tragedies, there can be light. A reminder that we are more connected to each other and to whatever waits beyond this life than we might ever realize. And a reminder that the question echoing through Jeff's experience may be the one waiting for all of us someday. How deeply have you learned to love?